Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webcast about evolving real security for the era of artificial intelligence. I'm Mike Shima, host of Application Security Weekly. Thank you to today's sponsor, Apiiro, and thank you for joining us for this expert discussion. AI is inescapable. There's a hackneyed computer joke about trying to remember the right command sequence to escape Vim or Emacs. These days, the joke is inverted. It's on developers who can't escape AI regardless of their IDE. Of course, many developers embrace AI, looking for help to create more code more quickly. And all of that means that AI-generated code is both an explicit and implicit part of today's SDLC, which also means is complicit in security, or sadly, the lack thereof. But if AI means apparently inescapable, it doesn't mean abandon InfoSec. Here to help us work on a better definition of a secure future with AI is Katie Norton and Adon Plotnick. Katie is a research manager for IDC's DevSecOps and Software Supply Chain Security Research Practice. Hello, Katie.
Hi, Mike. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you here, and also happy to have Adon, who's a serial entrepreneur and product strategist, bringing nearly 20 years of experience in cybersecurity as co-founder and CEO of Apiiro. Hello, Adon.
Hi.
So it's great to have the both of you here because I think you're going to be very helpful in fleshing out that definition of what security means for AI. And off the bat, I just want to set why are we here? Because I want to set that premise that developers are already overwhelmed with dependency vulnerabilities, et cetera. This is just from the code they're writing. So now they're not even writing code, but they're trying to review code from the LLMs. If they're already overwhelmed, it's getting worse. So, what are the real risks that they're looking at? Because I also suspect it's not just more dependency vulns that they now have to pay attention to. And so, Katie, I think you've probably got a good idea of across many orgs what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. I have some thoughts here I can share. I think when I think about developers using coding assistants, there's a couple of considerations, right? And when it comes to security, not just it, we often talk about just the coding assistant and the AI creating vulnerabilities itself, just from, it being trained on large amounts of open source code that, often has a lot of vulnerabilities naturally in it. But I think another thing we have to think about too is LLMs multiply the number of pull requests and code changes. We've seen in our research that developers are saying, they are, I think on average, 30 to 35% faster and more productive in their own assessment. So that just means you're naturally increasing the amount of volume, which can therefore increase the number of dependency issues, but also things like secret exposure, insecure coding patterns, licensing risks. All of that stuff is just being introduced at a much faster rate. And I think one of the things you have to think about too is that with human written code, there's at least this chain of intent, right? But with LLM generated code, the origin of a snippet or what's being included is often unclear, which creates another level of issues, right? Was it hallucinated? Was it drawn from an open source example? And that then can introduce licensing risk, like I mentioned as well. And then, just was it assembled without context as we move to, many developers to this vibe coding style model? There's this level of abstraction where you're not necessarily intimately familiar with, the exact functions that the code's, executing. And so all of this really complicates, trust. And then also, remediation of those issues from the security perspective.
Yeah, and that's got to be, highlighting that aspect of trust is huge because trust is also what we needed for humans writing code. Do we trust that Mike didn't introduce any mistakes, introduce any insecurities, or what have you? But Adon, this sounds like we already had talking about trust in people, and we're relying on people to review code. It sounds like we're breaking the processes that people are relying on. Like, how do you what are the angles that you see here?
Yeah, again, we work with Fortune 500 companies, and what we see that without hiring more developers, now a company that has 10,000 developers now suddenly has 30,000. 30 5,000 software developers, and everything breaks down. All the processes, all the scanners, all the current guardrails are not meeting the velocity that Katie was talking about, which I just want to plus one on what Katie said. We ran a research on a Fortune 2020 customer, and we did like development velocity versus risk before you started using GitHub Copilot and after using GitHub Copilot, and it's exactly what Katie said. It's 3 to 4x more code commits. It's 10x more findings on your SCA, SAST, and secrets. And again, your AppSec team stays the same, and your developers stayed the same number, but you just amplify the problem. So think about how you can do threat models now. There is no way with this velocity you can run threat models. And I'm just, again, repeating what Katie said. How do you fix all these findings? So you need a change, a fundamental change in the way AppSec programs are designed and implemented. And I think one more thing is that you cannot assess the risk of code only by analyzing the code. You need to understand your organizational policy. The LLM or the AI coding assistant doesn't understand my specific security and risk policy in a specific organization. The LLM or the AI coding assistant doesn't understand where this code is deployed. What are the compensating controls? So you need to bring all this context into the AI coding assistant to be able to change this paradigm or way of AppSec programs to be implemented in these large enterprises.
Yeah, and there's an easy way out for AppSec just to answer questions like, is this secure, to say, it depends. And that's kind of what you were teasing out in the sense of, what's the context of where this code is running? And pointing out, too, that developers, AppSec teams have to keep up with this. It's also easy for AppSec teams to say, yep, do your threat modeling, follow the OWASP top 10 list, do this checklist. And checklists haven't worked for 20 years. So I'm curious what the two of you have seen. Are there any orgs that are starting to figure out how to do a better approach here, or actually just changing that behavior of 20 years in just the tools or how they're trying to scale this approach?
Yeah, I mean, I can chime in a little bit here. I think I would say we're still very early days of, I think we're at that point where organizations are realizing this problem just now, right? Because as we've seen with AI in general across organizations, not just coding assistants, like most new technology, and honestly with AI, it's been even faster adoption than, say, if you compare this to, say, cloud adoption, 10 years ago. The scale of that and the speed at which that was adopted was much slower. I mean, I'm with AI coding assistants in particular, we're seeing numbers like at least 50% of like an enterprise development staff is using coding assistants. And I would say upwards of 80 to 90% of organizations at least have some known use of AI coding assistants. If you include shadow usage, you're probably
nobody's ignoring it, right?
Yeah. And so I think we're at this friction point where people are starting to like hit these bottlenecks and realizing that part of the promise of that increased, productivity and velocity, we're hitting these bottlenecks, and security is particularly one of them, where you might have all of this code being created and thinking you can get to market faster. But then, if your functional testing, your CI/CD pipelines and your security testing, if that's not automated, then you're just losing all of that ground that you've gained, right? And so I think what I'm seeing right now at most of the organizations I work with is sort of we're hitting that like, oh no, point of like this, how we're doing things, like you've said, Mike, checklists, anything that's not automated, you just totally lose any of those gains. And so that's where, we're starting to see this evolving of, I think, application security things like ASPM, things like agent-based AppSec, but I still think we're not quite there yet on the mass adoption point of really fixing the problem. I don't know, Idan, if you see, with Apiiro, are you starting to see organizations start to fix this stuff?
So before I will answer, I just want to say one step back because it's important. I think that the problem that we see here is the huge or exponential growth of AI across any organization in the world. And the CTO, CIO, even CEO are pushing top down. Everyone must use AI coding assistant. I just saw a few weeks ago the TechCrunch article from the CEO at Coinbase. If in 1 week my developers will not embed AI coding assistant, they are fired. I don't like this approach, but I see it more and more and more. And when it goes top down, on one hand, the business is growing and you have more features because more code means more code resources, more features. But on the other hand, the CISO, who wasn't part of the decision, is not ready. He or she, they're not ready. And then they need to handle all the flood of all these vulnerabilities and new types of risks. As Katie said, so many open source dependencies, so many duplications, so many issues on compliance and licenses and others. I'm just saying that it's a very interesting problem because the problem is not directly from attackers. It's a problem that comes from the business, and then you need the right solution to fix these types of risks. And now to your question, I don't think that organizations are still mature to fix these automatically. I think this is where we are heading as an industry. Everyone will have an auto fix capabilities in their agent, and the agent will be in the IDE because the IDE is the new parameter now. ID is the flood or the gate where everything goes or all the risks will come from. And I think that one thing that we see from our customers is that to be able to fix these types of risks fast as the development velocity or aligned with the development velocity, you need context. And now context is, I'm going back to what I said, you cannot fix something if you don't understand where it's deployed, what's the compensating control, what is your software architecture, how it looks like, what is the database that you are using, how do you store data in the database. So you need to actually understand the software architecture to be able to fix fast as the IDE, because if not, you will have like a traffic light of a lot of reds all the time, and then it will affect the developer's velocity. So I just think that everyone will go to an auto fix capabilities. The winner will be the one that has the right data and the right context to fix the right things. And in large enterprises, again, it's a little bit different between the mid-market and the large enterprises. In the large enterprises, you must embed yourself into the existing risk lifecycle management. They already have their own risk acceptance processes, so you are not going to change it. So your agent in the IDE needs to be aware not only to the policies, not only to where it's deployed, but also what is the risk lifecycle, and embed yourself in it and be in an asynchronous way where you can wait for something or for a different C-level to accept the risk and only then be able to fix it before it gets into your source control manager.
Yeah, and there's an aspect there of obviously bringing that context, which enriches the idea of what's the real risk here? How much do we care? But and everyone would love to see that auto fix. Before we get too much on the fix side, though, there's still some subtleties in finding. You have to know that there's a problem anyway. And we started off talking, Katie mentioned, how much do we trust, or how much are developers trusting the code or misplacing their trust? And Adon, even from your perspective, we can't just offhand say as an AppSec team, deploy this tool, use this tool. We can't say deploy WAF and we've solved cross-site scripting and SQL injection. 20 years later, we still have that. So what are the subtleties here of just being able to understand that how do these scanners, how do these tools need to also adapt to what this world of AI generated code looks like?
So I think that there is, again, there is a huge opportunity right now to finally, and Katie and I and you are in this industry for many, many, many years, to actually make a change. And I witnessed the identity security change, the endpoint from antivirus to XDR, and to and I think this is the evolution that we see right now. And what I mean by that is that you have a hook into the, I would say, into the IDE in a totally different way. Because until now, everyone developed a plugin, and you need to deploy a plugin. And then the customer, they have two different SaaS tools. One SCA, one secret, siloed tools. Each one of them has a different plugin, and the plugin has a different policies. And then they bombard the developer, and then the developer delete the plugin, and no one actually can govern that. Okay.
Yeah, no one wants all that noise. No.
Exactly. And now with MCP, I think MCP and ASPM together, you have a unique opportunity to integrate seamlessly into the IDE without installing an agent, without installing a plugin, and have unified policy, unified risk engine and risk score on top of each of the findings. And then, the AST tool, it's commodity. You want one day to use X or Y? Great. Disconnect from the ASPM, and then the developer, they don't even know which tool is being used, because you have one language, one developer experience. And I think this is a huge, huge opportunity for us to actually finally change the equation between, or not the equation, the relationship between security and developers. Developers always hates security because they don't understand their language, because they bombard them with CVSS, EPSS, all these things that they don't understand. Okay, so I just think that right now with the AI coding assistant, yes, it creates a huge problem for security, amazing opportunity for the business. This is why it will never ever disappear. Okay, and security has a unique opportunity to integrate into the IDE seamlessly and provide all these policies, all these risk assessment into the developer. Again, the one that will win the IDE will be the one with the right data and the seamless hooks into the IDE.
Yeah, and what you're describing too is not that developers need to become these experts on how to manage all of these different plugins or whatever MCPs. They need to be the experts, as you said, on that design phase. And as a AppSec pen tester and reviewer and coder myself, that appeals to me immensely. But there always has to be a but here. I'm less optimistic that people are investing there. And Katie, I'm curious, do you see orgs investing on that design phase, or where are they planning to invest in this world of AI tools and approaches?
Yeah, actually we do see, what's funny is at IDC, we do a ton of research, both at a very high level around AI adoption, and I do a lot of application security specific surveying and research. And I mean, generally, when we ask where, in especially the current environment, where budgets are most immune and where the investments are going, it's AI and cybersecurity are the top two.
No surprise, yeah.
But when it comes to AppSec in particular, I actually just recently in July ran a survey, and I asked around where, what AppSec budgets were looking like today and in 2025 and where they're making those investments. And we still see, your scanners, again, to this point I made earlier, right, of like, we're at this kind of nexus, the same point Don's making, and we have this opportunity for change, but literally 0.2 behind in percentage, right, was they're looking for tools that are going to secure Gen AI and AI agents as like the second highest place for AppSec investment. And then we also see things like security training and ASPM and automated fixing, all kind of in that top half of the list. So all the things around here we've been talking about, ASPM to provide that context, tools to secure that Gen AI and AI agents. So I do really see, especially this year in 2025, that's where folks are starting to think about and putting money into, these types of tools for their organizations.
I think you said something very interesting. And I think that from my conversations with CISOs and CIOs, it's very confusing. Like there is the way to secure AI that is being used in your code, your own developers, or to secure AI from I bought an application and it's in runtime, and now I might have a prompt injection because this app that I bought is using a chatbot or whatever.
Yep.
And I think these are two different things, because the solution that secures AI in runtime is totally different from the tools that secure AI usage in the code. And then there is another maybe bucket where you use AI for security. So
100%.
for example, you use AI model to run on code or on text and be able to run automated threat models or things like that. So I hope these three different buckets make sense to our audience, because it's very, very confusing, even for me and for all the discussions with the prospects and customers. And I think that in the second one, where you need to secure AI in your own code base, okay, when your developers are using Gen AI framework, which is an exit point to access from your own application to a third-party service, or you embed a model in your own code. I think that we see there a lot of success from one simple use case, and it's the ability to inventory and like discover and inventory all the AI agents, MCP servers, AI models, and other types of AI components in your code. And it's very, very, like, as Katie said, this is something that we see budgets going towards that. And of course, the AI agent that auto-fix stuff is using AI to secure the code itself.
Yeah, Katie also mentioned that aspect of cloud adoption. That's we could look back about 10 years ago. That was really big, and I like that topic because cloud adoption evolved into infrastructure as code. We have actually something very predictable, very deterministic. You can basically have a linter, a grep for your Terraform, for your human readable code that defines your environment. I don't think we have a parallel to that in the AI world. And Don, to your point, we are mostly focused here about Gen AI impact on code, Gen AI creating code, humans having to review it. But you're also pointing out Gen AI can be part of that auto fix. Maybe Gen AI can apply some context, help with that design phase. How close are we to that, to a future of that infrastructure as code of LLM as security? We don't even have an acronym for this,
Maybe
Can we rely on
Katie
this?
will
Yeah, I
help
know.
us,
Here comes my
and
job, right?
Yeah.
and influence the industry. But I would say that first and foremost, again, in Apiiro, our state of mind from day one was we need to, when we say shift left, we mean to the design phase. So today at Apiiro, as an ASPM platform, which is different than the other ASPM, we actually have a solution, same as SCA and SAST and secret scanners. We have a solution for design risks. What does it mean? It means that we trained our own model on a feature request design specs, and we fuse between your software inventory, like which frameworks you're using, how many APIs, what's the authentication authorization. And then we say, oh, just a second, the product management asks you to write a new API that sends sensitive data to Stripe. Great. We run a threat model on that before you start coding. And then we provide contextual mitigations before you start coding. And I think this is, we see a momentum there. And because the outcome is very simple, the business outcome is you cannot scan or you cannot review manually every feature request or design spec, and you need to automate that. And how do you automate that? Today with AI, okay? So this is one of the views from our philosophy, that we need, one, to have an SDLC system of record, connects the feature request to the commit, to who review it, to the pull request, to the build, to the deployment, to the artifact, and then actually automate the manual processes like threat model, like security review, and other stuff using AI.
Yeah. And
I'll chime in here real quick too. And I think in addition to the design stage, and Mike, like you were talking about as code, and I don't know that we're totally even can conceptualize what that is yet for AI.
Code is code doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Right. No, but it's a really interesting thought. But what I'm seeing right now too is, especially around when, blowing out to, like, I used to cover DevOps as well, in addition to DevSecOps, and the transition to platform engineering, right, I think has a big impact on this. And what I see is guardrails, right, as sort of that first stage. A lot of what Adam's been talking about is policies, right, and these go hand in hand. And I think, while because of the non-deterministic aspect of AI, again, whether in use of coding, whether in use of in the applications you're developing, that what kind of the starting point needs to be is building these guardrails or golden paths or whatever kind of terminology you want to use there about what is allowed and what is not allowed, and make the easy path the right path. And that will become even more important as we shift to more autonomous agentic systems that are going to require very explicit, like, scopes of work and capabilities and responsibilities. Otherwise, managing that the output and the behavior of those things becomes impossible to control and have any sort of management over. So I think the combination of shifting and using AI in the design phase, as well as building these guardrails into the platforms and internal developer platforms that developers are working from, can kind of help sort of control that AI as best as we can.
And that highlights a subtle point that I might have skipped over that Adon was making earlier. Actually, I started off talking about dependencies and dependency vulns because that's already what overwhelms people. And no one is trying to say, hey, AppSec team, go vet this package, this package, this package. No human, you're going to burn them out if you try to do that. And Adon, you were kind of talking about the risk angle, which is actually much more important than just quote unquote security, because that's where the context comes from. That's where we're accepting it, or saying we need to mitigate this. So I'm curious, Adon, from your side, how do the tools help? How does LLMs help here? Because Katie was kind of saying, well, what if this is what the framework should be, or only use this framework, or only rely on this SaaS vendor, but not this other SaaS vendor? Do we just have the LLM, go through the plus minus, thumbs up, thumbs down?
So I don't, LLM is just a tool. It depends on what data and context you bring to the LLM. And I do think that, again, in large enterprises, they already implemented their security and compliance policies, okay? Which, again, if you take the policies plus what you have in your software architecture, plus what you have in your compensating control, then together it's your risk, okay? And you need to calculate that in a real time. Today, it doesn't work in, hey, let's wait until we finish the development. It needs to be calculated for every code commit. Now, to your point on open source, I think that this is a very, very interesting era again, because LLM, from our experience, and I did a demo literally 2 weeks ago, where I'm asking Cursor to develop a capability, and it spits hundreds of open source dependencies with so many duplications. I'm not talking even on pure CVEs and vulnerabilities. I'm talking about the expansion of the attack surface of the application. It's insane, because the LLM doesn't understand your software architecture as a whole, and it doesn't know that you already have a logging framework, or you have an input validation in the API gateway, or things like that. So it's just bombarding you with more and more open source. This is why I think there are multiple research out there that shows that if you're using Cursor as a new developer versus a senior developer, okay, a junior or a senior, you see that the quality of code is the same. As senior developer actually understand, why do I need this open source dependency, while junior developer will introduce all these risks. So I think the problem is with open source is so big. And now I want to connect what Katie said earlier, because I think this is the key. If we will have guardrails that actually understand that they're not static, it's not like the old days. Again, I'm in my head, something is popping up, and one of the CISOs told me, the internet revolution brought the firewalls like Palo and Checkpoint, and the AI revolution with AI coding assistant will bring the new firewall for code, or whatever we will call it. And I think this is what Katie is saying. But I think the opportunity here is to put the guardrails closer to the developer, because now with MCP, you have all the context, because plugins were static and they scanned only file of the code that you are writing. Now with MCP on the IDE, you have a brain, okay, the brain, and then you can stop the risks and detect them and fix them before they even get into your GitHub repository. And this is a game changer when it will happen. I think, as again, I'm repeating what Katie said, the industry is not mature yet, but they will be. And I think at the moment, the guardrails will move from the CI/CD pipeline, or, it will be a defense in depth. Okay. So you will have in the CI/CD pipeline, but also in the IDE, then we will see a decline in the risk, while we're not impacting the development velocity. We're not bombarding them with a lot of, red alerts in their IDE. I hope this makes sense.
It does. And what I very much appreciate about what the point you were making, and the underlying theme of what you've both been talking about, is that human developers are still working. They're not being replaced. They're just slightly changing the behavior of where their focus is. Their focus is less on what I keep going back to, that boring part of dependencies out, patch this dependency, patch this, to that design phase. But this is something that I think perhaps, Adon, it's a little bit easier for you to convince Katie and I about this. But what do both of you, what recommendations do you have for how orgs can actually change that behavior for developers? So you have that richer conversation to say, here's what design phase, or here's what security looks like at design phase, in addition to how the LLMs can or can't, for that matter. I think that can is the answer here. But there's got to be a way for orgs to make that shift too in how they're focusing. What advice do you have for somebody that's trying to do that?
Just before the advice, and I'm sure Katie will give the advice, I will just say one thing that is a game changer. Now on the ID, you're writing in English, so we know what you want. And then the same ID generates the code. So now you have the same thing, what you want the code to do in English and the source code or in the IDE. And I think this is the game changer. If you will hook at the right place and you connect these two together, at the IDE, you can say, hey, just a second, this is not what I meant in my design. And you can compare it to source code without going to other systems. And I think, again, I hope that CISOs will understand that and how big impact it can be on their AppSec programs. But Katie will tell them, what's your advice?
Yeah, no, I think what you're saying is great. And from the advice front, I think this is the, sort of the same old tale, but like developer experience is a really important part of this. And I think where the technology is going, it's finally giving an opportunity for security to be just sort of naturally integrated. And to Idan's point, like everything's collapsing into the IDE. It's not that the controls in CI/CD and particularly runtime controls with AI are all the more important than they've been, but that's that when we think about shift left and these concepts, right, of like DevSecOps and where that all kind of goes, it's all about leveraging AI to make security just an implicit and frictionless part of what developers are doing. And I think one good example here is just with how we've seen in IDE security change over time, in that it used to be squiggly lines, all of this noise to the point of being static, right? And people would ignore it because it was just so much. You maybe would right click on it and it sends you out to some website with a long vulnerability explanation and no context to your particular application. Developers would say, forget this, right? And now we're moving to the point where security can finally actually be like spell check, right? Like you right click on it, you accept the change, it implements it. And you think about just removing yourself from security, just how humans frictionlessly like, yep, I spelled this wrong, click the list, I picked, this was the word I wanted to use, move on. And I think we'll finally are starting to get to that point within IDE security. And that's that friction, right? And how we actually get developers to implement these things as they're coding. And so I think when organizations are evaluating these tools, the important thing is, one, make sure security is involved from the beginning, like that AppSec should be involved in whether it's an explicit security tool or an integration, or it becomes part of the IDE itself. However this manifests, that security needs to be involved in these decisions from the front, and then they're really also prioritizing that developer experience with this stuff, because that's how you get it to these things to just happen as the developer is coding, and to the point we've been making over and over again. The more you can reduce, whether through guardrails or through more frictionless in IDE experience, the more you can prevent from ever getting into the code base, the better off you are, right? And the less impact that all of these things will have on the downstream systems.
Amen to all of this. I totally agree. I want to say one thing. I know we're running out of time. Without the proper data, we will be at the same situation of bombarding the developers, because LLM by itself, if you take a code base and put it in an LLM, everyone thinks it's magic. No, you need to enrich it. It's called, now there is a new term in the industry called contextual engineering, not prompt engineering. So we will have a contextual security engineering where we'll take data, for example, from the software inventory, the software graph, how it assembled, what are the components, and put it into the prompt or whatever you call it. And then the LLM will get much more context to achieve what Katie said, because everything boils down to developer experience.
It absolutely does. And just to build on that, what's the point of saying we have our LLM or AI code increasing our velocity when all we do is have then the developer waste their time and lose all of those advantages on reading through long reports, PDF reports for that matter, or just long lists of go fix this, go fix this. And I wanted to turn that into a question that actually I think Idan almost mostly answered just now, in the sense of, from the tool perspective, how do you make sure, basically, how do you create that good developer experience? How do you pay attention to where the responsibility is, and I'll use that word, context is, for who's either introducing the vuln or working with the tools that are introducing the vuln to also fix it?
Yeah, so I think from my point of view, I see two different phases on the idea, as I said, where you help the developer while they interact with the AI coding assistant. So the output from the get-go, from like secure by design, will be totally different. So if you go and ask, you put two AI coding assistants side by side, you ask the question here, like, fix this secret or help me fix this secret. And this AI coding assistant doesn't understand the software architecture and the competency controls and the policies. The output will be generic. Hey, you know what? Maybe you need to install a KMS like HashiCorp. But the other AI coding assistant that understands your software inventory and software graph will say, hey, just a second. I know that in this code base, Katie 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago implemented GCP KMS, and I know that you are using this framework in Java. Here is a code that will help you, and it already, the same code passed security review.
Yeah, there's that guardrail.
Ago.
Yeah.
So this is how you build trust. You build trust by saying, I know that this already passed the security review, so you will not be blocked by any of this. And or saying, you know what? This is you introduce a risk to the code, but you have a compensating control in runtime, so you don't need to fix it. You have other places where you can spend your time, and this is an interaction. This is a new developer experience in the IDE that we believe will change the industry. But you cannot do that without deeply understanding your software architecture and software graph, and building the right inventory to do that.
Yeah, and I'll add, I think exactly what you said, and I think this is also what you're saying too. It's like noise and is the thing that kills trust, right? And this is where, when we combine understanding the context of your software with the AI capabilities in the developer workflow, that's where you are able to actually gain that trust and that developer experience, right? Because the easiest way to get a developer to not care about security or not, enact on even the notifications that they're given is to give them false positives, to give them things that are inaccurate, that they know, doesn't matter. And so by, not only I made a great point too, you're compensating controls, you're, understanding, okay, we use this tool and not that tool, like having that level of intelligence and knowledge and context along with the security findings, or enhancing those security findings. That's how you get developers to, one, trust and accept these things, and then also not ignore them. They when they realize that the findings of these tools are real, and you can help them understand that and their importance in the context of the application that they're working on, that's how you really build that developer trust.
And there's also there's an aspect of audience experience that I want to acknowledge too. And we're getting low on time, but bear with me. I want to squeeze in a couple more questions maybe. And first, throw back over to you, Katie. You've talked to a lot of orgs. You were looking at, what are they investing in? And it was LLM tools in many degrees. Auto fixing sounds very appealing, as well as training. What about, have you had those conversations around success, or we're more secure or less secure, or it's something that would be forward looking, or giving you some options here? What are some questions you'd want to ask those orgs in 6 months from now after they've been using a bunch of these tools?
Yeah, one of the interesting things, my job as an analyst, right, is asking a lot of questions of both vendors and of organizations and in surveys. So this is a great question. And I think for me, looking at, say, 6 months out, that of an organization that's starting to adopt some of this stuff, there's some like metric-y type things that are interesting, like what's the acceptance rate of this kind of stuff? Like, so if you implement auto fixing technology, whether in the IDE or in the pull request, or there's lots of places, even backlog management, where we see auto fixing as well. That acceptance rate can also indicate not only the accuracy of the tool, but like the developer experience, right? Oftentimes even in like normal AI tools, you see like the thumbs up or thumbs down and that kind of stuff. Like that those experiential statistics can be very revealing about the effectiveness of these tools. I would also look to see things like your typical, measurements of AppSec or DevSecOps success. And do you see any increase in those things? One of on the backlog side, for instance, you might want to look at, like, have you been able to implement or eliminate entire classes of vulnerabilities from your backlog? Oftentimes we've seen the evolvement of things like security campaigns, and tying that with the use of AI and auto remediation to be able to say, all right, we're going to go and spend a week and get rid of all of the cross-site scripting, right? And do it in a more coordinated fashion. And then I would also look at too how organizations are now tying all of these tools together as well, and the different places in which AI plus context is allowing them to sort of those, ROI is really hard to measure. A lot of those like productivity stats from the developer side, at least I'll say in our research, is very self-reported, right? Yeah. So it would be interesting. You can then, if you have automated pipelines, actually be able to measure things through your normal like DORA type stats, like is your MTTR, is your change failure rate, are any of these things increasing or decreasing? And so the more that you can tie metrics to actually see from start to finish, not just we're so focused on that like developer speed, but is the rest of your pipeline, is the rest, is the security outcomes of your applications improving at all? Those are the things that I would look to see at an organization that's really heavily investing in and implementing AI sort of across the board in both development and security.
Yeah, and hopefully we see a lot of that. And that's where I want to change to a little bit from maybe a slightly different perspective. Adon, you've had a lot of conversations with CISOs already about, just what they're struggling with. 6 months from now, what would you hope is a different kind of conversation you're having with a CISO?
I hope, but I really see the change on a daily basis. Okay. Because it's hitting them so hard, the amount of findings after you start using these AI coding assistants. Okay, so what I hope is that everyone will have whatever we will call them, auto-fix AI agent or firewalls on the ID. I want every developer to seamlessly, the way they interact with cursor, the output of this will be secure by design. If they are designing a feature with AI coding assistant and then writing the code, or they just writing the code, I want to see these guardrails and this context in the IDE, and the measure or the way to measure success of that, I think it's simple. I want to see less vulnerabilities getting into my code repos. It will never be 100% bulletproof because you have 0 days. So you can add a vulnerability that was not discovered by your SAST or by your SCA. SAST because it's a business logic application and you need to detect it through a material change detection, or open source dependency that had 0 vulnerabilities, but 3 months later had a vulnerability. But I'm saying I don't want to see, or I want to see a graph that is declining in the number of findings in my code repos. And I think this is the dream. This is where I see a major change in our application security market.
Yeah, and I love that. And even with that number, the number should go down. But to also emphasize Katie's point, this class of vulnerabilities should just disappear. We're not going to have perfectly secure. And I know that's not what you were saying, but if we can no longer see those cross-site scripting, SQL injection, to pick on those old school ones, what a wonderful future that'll be.
100%.
Yes, and talking about acceptance rate, my acceptance rate from the advice and wisdom you've both been sharing is very high, and hopefully the same goes too for all of our listeners who've been enjoying this conversation. I want to say thank you to you both for this time.
Thanks for having me. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you for having me, and we will watch this episode in a year from now, and we see that we predicted the future, and this is the fun stuff.
Oh, if AppSec could turn into the phrase "this is the fun stuff," you just my heart will expand immensely. I love that. Thank you for that positive thinking.
Thank you.
So
always positive.
Always positive. And speaking of positive things, thanks once again to Apiiro for sponsoring today's webcast. And of course, thank you to everyone who's joined us today and everyone in the future, whether it's a full year from now or not, who's been listening to this recording. Make sure to check out apiiro.com and keep an eye on securityweekly.com for more engaging webcasts like today's. Thank you.